The first time Mark ever told me I was losing my mind, I laughed it off. We were standing in our kitchen, the one with the marble countertops he'd insisted on, and he was holding the credit card statement like it was evidence in a murder trial. "Sarah, you spent $3,000 on clothes last month. Don't you remember?" His voice was calm, almost gentle, the way it always was when he was rewriting reality. I stared at the statement. I knew I hadn't spent that money. I'd been saving every extra penny for the trip to Italy we'd been talking about for years, but there it was in black and white. Charges from boutiques I'd never entered. My stomach twisted as doubt crept in. Had I blacked out? Was I really that stressed? That was the night I almost believed him forever. "My name is Sarah, and for 5 years I've been married to Mark. To the outside world, we were perfect. He was the charismatic finance executive who could charm an entire room with one smile. I was the supportive wife with a successful accounting career, always perfectly dressed, always laughing at his jokes. Our Instagram was filled with filtered photos of vacations, date nights, and captions about how we were couple goals. But inside our beautiful suburban home, something had started to rot. It began slowly. Little comments disguised as concern. "Sweetheart, are you sure you told me about that lunch with your friend? I don't remember you mentioning it." Or, "You seem so forgetful lately. Maybe you should see a doctor." Each time I'd apologize, convinced I was the one slipping. He'd isolate me without me noticing, convincing me my old friends were toxic or jealous of our life together. When I wanted to visit my family, there was always some reason it wasn't a good time. Work was stressful. He needed me. We had plans. The affection came in waves. Some weeks he'd shower me with gifts and attention, making me feel like the most cherished woman alive. Others, he'd barely look at me, claiming exhaustion from work while staying out late with clients. That evening with the credit card statement was different, though. Something in his eyes, too steady, too knowing, made me pause. After he went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table staring at those charges. My hands shook as I opened my banking app. The transactions weren't there, not in our joint account, not in my personal one. For the first time, real fear settled in my chest. The next day, while Mark was at the gym, I started searching online. Partner making me question my memory, emotional manipulation in relationships, signs of gaslighting. The results made my blood run cold. Every symptom described him perfectly. The love bombing followed by devaluation. The isolation, the way he'd twist conversations until I was apologizing for things I hadn't done, the constant feeling that I was going crazy. Narcissist. The word stared back at me from countless articles, forums, survivor stories. Women describing men exactly like Mark. Men who built you up just to tear you down. Men who needed control above everything else. I closed the laptop quickly when I heard his car in the driveway, my heart pounding. That night at dinner, he was his charming self again, telling stories, touching my hand, planning our future like nothing had happened. But something had changed forever. I smiled back at him across the table, the perfect wife, while inside, a tiny seed of doubt had taken root, and it was growing fast. The seed of doubt from that night grew into something I couldn't ignore. Every smile Mark gave me felt calculated. Every "I love you" sounded like lines from a script he'd memorized long ago. I started watching him more closely, replaying old arguments in my head, and each time the pattern became clearer. He wasn't just stressed or difficult, he was dismantling me, piece by careful piece. I told myself I needed proof before I let the word narcissist fully settle in my mind. Proof that I wasn't the crazy one. One Thursday afternoon, Mark texted me that he'd be working late. Another important client dinner. He kissed me on the forehead as he left, the same way he always did, like everything was perfectly normal. The door clicked shut behind him, and the house fell silent. For the first time in months, I was completely alone with his things. His laptop sat on the desk in his home office, lid half open, screen still glowing faintly. He almost never left it unlocked. He was paranoid about security, or so he claimed. But today, in his rush, he'd forgotten. My pulse hammered in my ears as I sat down and touched the trackpad. The screen brightened instantly, no password required. I don't know what I was looking for at first. Maybe just reassurance that I was overthinking everything. Instead, I found hell. I opened his email and scrolled through the sent folder. There, Buried between work messages was a thread with a subject line that made my breath catch: asset division strategy, urgent. The recipient was a divorce attorney I'd never heard of. I clicked. Page after page of cold clinical discussion. Mark asking how to transfer funds without raising red flags, asking about hiding assets in offshore accounts, asking how to make it look like I was the one who had drained our savings. One email even included a draft narrative, how I'd supposedly developed a shopping addiction and secret gambling problem that justified him seeking full control of our finances in a divorce. He wasn't planning to leave me. He was planning to destroy me first. My hands shook so badly I could barely control the cursor. I kept scrolling. There were spreadsheets attached, our joint accounts, but altered. Thousands of dollars moved in small increments over months, funneled into accounts I'd never seen. Accounts in his name only. Then I found the messages to her. His assistant, Claire, the one who always laughed a little too hard at his jokes in the office. Late-night texts that started professionally and quickly turned intimate. Photos. Plans for weekends away disguised as conferences. A shared Pinterest board of modern lofts downtown, the kind of place a new couple would choose together. I felt the room tilt. The man who told me every day that I was his whole world had been building an entirely separate one without me in it. I forced myself to stay calm. Panic would make noise, and noise would bring him home early if he'd forgotten something. I plugged in a small USB drive I kept in my purse, the one I used for work backups, and copied everything. Emails, spreadsheets, chat logs, screenshots of the texts. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure the neighbours could hear it. When the transfer finished, I ejected the drive, closed every window exactly as I'd found it, and shut the laptop lid. I walked to the kitchen on legs that felt like water and poured myself a glass of wine with shaking hands. I didn't drink it. I just needed something to hold. Mark came home just after 11, smelling faintly of someone else's perfume. He kissed my cheek and asked how my evening was. Quiet, I said, smiling the same smile I'd perfected over years of practice. Just relaxed and caught up on some reading. He nodded, satisfied, and went to shower. I stood in the dark living room long after the water stopped running, staring at nothing. The man I married wasn't real. The life we'd built was a stage, and I'd been playing a role he'd written for me, one that ended with me broken and alone while he walked away unscathed. But I had the proof now, and I wasn't going to wait for him to pull the curtain down on me. I slipped the USB drive into the hidden pocket of my jewellery box, right behind the necklace he'd given me for our last anniversary. The game had changed. He just didn't know it yet. The USB drive burned a hole in my jewellery box for days. Every time I passed it, I felt its weight, like a live wire hidden among my earrings and necklaces. I didn't look at the files again. I couldn't. Seeing them once had been enough to keep me awake at night, replaying every moment of the last 5 years, searching for the exact second I'd stopped seeing him clearly. But knowing wasn't enough. I needed to understand how deep the betrayal went, and how much time I had left before he struck. I started small. I created a new email address under a fake name and contacted a private investigator I found through an online support forum for women leaving narcissistic partners. Her name was Elena. She didn't ask pointless questions. She just asked for the USB drive and a retainer I could pay from the small inheritance my grandmother had left me, the one account Mark had never managed to fold into our joint finances. Within a week, Elena's first report arrived encrypted in my new inbox. It was worse than I'd imagined. Mark and Claire weren't just having an affair, they were planning a life together. Elena's photos showed them viewing apartments in the city, sleek, expensive places with floor-to-ceiling windows. There were receipts from jewellery stores, weekend hotel bookings under Claire's name, even screenshots from a shared note on Mark's phone titled Post-Sarah Timeline. Post-Sarah, like I was a project phase coming to an end. But the real knife twist was the business angle. We co-owned a small consulting firm, my accounting expertise paired with his sales charisma. It had been my idea originally, built on clients I'd brought in from my old network. Over the years, Mark had slowly taken credit for its success, but the book's still in my hands. Or so I'd thought. Elena uncovered forged documents in Mark's cloud storage, Backdated invoices, fake expense reports, transfers that made it look like I'd been siphoning company funds into a personal account. The amounts were carefully chosen, large enough to look criminal, small enough to seem plausible over time. He was building a paper trail that would let him accuse me of embezzlement. In a divorce, that evidence would destroy my professional license, my reputation, everything I'd worked for since college. He wasn't just leaving. He was going to make sure I fell so hard I could never get back up while he walked away looking like the victim. I read the report 3 times in a coffee shop 2 towns over, wearing a baseball cap pulled low and sunglasses even though it was raining. My hands didn't shake anymore. They were steady, cold. That night Mark came home in a great mood. He'd closed a big deal, he said. Brought home my favourite takeout, opened a bottle of champagne, talked about finally booking that Italy trip now that things are stable. I laughed in all the right places. I let him pull me onto the couch, let him kiss my neck while he murmured how much he needed me. Inside, I felt nothing but ice. Every day after that was a performance. I cooked his favourite meals, I asked about his day, I even suggested we renew our vows for our upcoming anniversary. Something small, intimate, just to remind ourselves how lucky we are. He loved the idea. Of course he did. It fit perfectly into his narrative, the devoted husband trapped in a marriage with an unstable wife. While he planned his victory lap, I planned something else. I started recording our conversations with an app on my phone. Every dismissive comment, every subtle dig disguised as concern. "You've been so scattered lately, babe. Maybe cut back on work?" Translation, make her doubt her competence. I quietly reconnected with old friends he'd pushed away, meeting them for coffee under the excuse of errands. They saw the change in me immediately, the tension in my smile, the way I kept checking my watch. They didn't ask questions. They just hugged me harder and said they were there if I needed anything. Elena kept sending updates. Mark had scheduled a meeting with his lawyer for the following month. He'd booked a moving company under Claire's name for 2 weeks after that. The clock was ticking louder every day. Some nights I lay next to him while he slept, listening to his steady breathing, and wondered how long he'd been this person. Had there ever been a real Mark? Or had I fallen in love with smoke and mirrors from the very beginning? The fear was still there, sharp and metallic in my throat. But something else was growing alongside it, something dark and focused. He thought he was the predator. He had no idea the prey had teeth. And I was done waiting for him to strike first. I stopped being afraid the day I decided to fight back. Fear had kept me frozen for weeks. Fear of being wrong, fear of losing everything, fear that he was smarter than me. But once I saw the full scope of Mark's plan, something inside me snapped into place. Cold, clear, unbreakable. I wasn't going to run. I wasn't going to beg. I was going to take everything he thought was his. The first move was legal. I drove 3 hours to meet Rebecca, an old college friend who had become one of the sharpest divorce attorneys in the state. We met in a quiet cafe, away from anyone who might recognize me. I handed her the USB drive and Elena's reports. She read them in silence, her expression growing darker with every page. When she finally looked up, she didn't offer pity. She offered strategy. "He's committing fraud," she said flatly. "Multiple counts. If we play this right, he won't just lose the divorce, he could face criminal charges. But we have to be flawless. One mistake and he'll twist it." I nodded. "Then let's be flawless." Over the next 2 weeks, Rebecca and I built a fortress. I signed retainers, opened new accounts in my name only, and quietly moved every asset I could legally touch into protected trusts. My grandmother's inheritance became the seed money for a new life I hadn't even dared to imagine yet. At home, I became the perfect wife, more attentive than ever. I planned romantic dinners, left little notes in his briefcase, suggested weekend getaways. Every gesture was designed to keep him complacent, to make him believe I was still completely under his spell. He bought it completely. His arrogance made him blind. While he bragged about upcoming business trips with Claire, I was documenting everything. I installed a small voice-activated recorder in the home office, legal in our state for one-party consent. Every time he took a call in there, I captured it. Arrogant conversations with his lawyer, laughing about how easy it would be to pin it all on Sarah, she's so emotional lately. mocking voicemails to Claire about the house they'd buy once I was out of the picture. Each recording felt like another brick in the wall I was building around him. I also started protecting the business. Late at night, after he was asleep, I logged into our company accounts and created encrypted backups of every legitimate transaction for the past 5 years. Then, I generated reports that clearly separated my work from his alterations. I emailed them to Rebecca from an anonymous account, time-stamped and unbreakable. Elena kept feeding me intel. Mark had pushed his lawyer meeting forward. He was getting impatient. He'd told Claire he wanted to serve me papers within the month. He'd even started packing a few things in the garage, hidden behind holiday decorations we hadn't touched since last year. The clock was almost up. One night, as we sat watching some mindless show on TV, he put his arm around me and said, "You know I'd do anything for you, right? We're in this forever." I leaned into him, smiled softly and said, "I know, forever." Inside, I was counting down the days. Rebecca filed emergency motions, quiet ones ex parte, to freeze certain accounts and preserve evidence before he could hide more. We didn't serve him yet. We waited. Timing was everything. I began withdrawing cash in small amounts, enough to have a safety net, but not enough to trigger suspicion. I opened a P.O. box under a variation of my maiden name. I forwarded important mail there. I bought a burner phone and kept it hidden in the lining of an old purse. Every step was calculated, every risk measured. The tension was excruciating. Some nights I could barely breathe, waiting for him to notice something off. A bank alert, a missing file, a question in his eyes. But he was too busy reveling in his own brilliance to see the trap closing around him. Then came the final piece. Rebecca discovered that Mark had understated his income on several tax returns, using the same hidden accounts to shelter bonuses. If exposed, the IRS would come knocking. Hard. We didn't need to report it ourselves. We just needed to make sure the right people saw the evidence at the right time. Everything was aligned. The storm was ready. He still thought he was the one holding the lightning, but I had become the thunder, and I was about to strike first. I chose the day carefully. Mark had a breakfast meeting downtown with his lawyer and 2 senior partners from his firm, the perfect audience for the performance he thought he was about to give. He left the house at 7:30, whistling, wearing the navy suit I'd picked out for him last Christmas. He kissed me goodbye like it was any other Tuesday. "Big day today," he said with a wink. "Might close that deal we've been chasing." I smiled, handed him his travel mug, and watched him back out of the driveway. "Break a leg," I called. He laughed and waved. He had no idea I meant it literally. At 8:15, Rebecca filed the divorce petition electronically, along with emergency motions for asset freeze, spousal support, and a temporary restraining order preventing him from touching any business accounts. Attached were the affidavits, the forensic accounting report, the recordings, Elena's surveillance photos, and a polite but devastating letter to the state bar flagging potential ethics violations by his attorney for participating in fraud. At 8:40, 2 uniformed officers and a plainclothes detective from the financial crimes unit arrived at his office building. I know the exact minute because Elena was parked across the street and texted me a photo of Mark being escorted out of the conference room. Tie askew, face pale, mouth open in mid-sentence. At 9:05, the story hit his professional network. Rebecca had arranged for a trusted colleague to forward the public filing notice to key people in his industry. Nothing unethical, just the normal circulation of public records. By the time he was in the interview room at the precinct, his biggest client had already emailed terminating their contract. 2 others followed before lunch. At 10:30, Claire called me. I let it ring twice before answering. Sarah, her voice was small, shaking. I don't know what's happening. Mark's been arrested and there are police at the office asking about me. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know about the money stuff. I let her ramble for 10 seconds. "Claire," I said calmly, "I have screenshots of every message you sent him, every photo, every plan you 2 made while he was still sharing my bed. If I were you, I'd get a lawyer before you say another word to anyone." She started crying. I ended the call. At 11, Mark tried to reach me from the precinct. I didn't pick up. He left a voicemail, first pleading, then furious, then pleading again. I saved it. Rebecca will love that one. By noon, the banks had frozen every account he controlled, the offshore ones too. Turns out Rebecca's forensic guy was better than his. The moving company Claire had booked, cancelled. The loft they'd put a deposit on, forfeited. I spent the afternoon in our kitchen, the same one where he'd once waved that fake credit card statement at me, drinking coffee and watching it all unfold in real time. Elena sent updates. Rebecca sent confirmations. Old friends I'd quietly reconnected with sent texts. We're here, whatever you need. At 4:30, Mark was released on his own recognizance. No charges filed yet. The detectives wanted him to sweat, but he was told not to leave the state. He came home just after 6. I was sitting on the couch with a glass of wine when I heard his key in the lock. He looked like a different person. Suit rumpled, eyes red, hair dishevelled. When he saw me, the mask slipped completely. "How could you do this to me?" he shouted, voice cracking. "After everything I've given you." I didn't flinch. "Everything you gave me?" I said quietly. "You mean the lies? The isolation? The years of making me think I was crazy? Or the secret accounts and the forged documents you were going to use to put me in prison?" He opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. "You're going to regret this, Sarah. I'll fight. I'll destroy you." I stood up slowly and walked toward him until we were face to face. "You already tried," I said, "and you lost." I handed him the envelope Rebecca had prepared, official divorce papers, a restraining order requiring him to leave the house immediately, and a list of motels within 10 miles. He stared at it like it was written in another language. "You have 30 minutes to pack a bag," I said. "After that, the police will escort you out." For the first time in 5 years, he had nothing to say. He packed one suitcase with shaking hands while I watched from the hallway. When the officers arrived, called by Rebecca to enforce the order, he didn't even look at me as they walked him to his car. I closed the door behind him, turned the deadbolt, and enabled the new security system I'd had installed the week before. Then I stood in the silent house, my house, and exhaled. The lightning had struck, and for the first time in years, I could breathe. The morning after Mark left, I woke up to silence. Not the heavy, watchful silence I'd lived with for years, the kind that waited for footsteps in the hallway or a sudden voice demanding to know why I'd left a glass in the sink. This was a clean silence. Sunlight poured through the bedroom windows, birds argued outside, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I didn't brace myself when I opened my eyes. The house was mine. The bed was mine. The day was mine. I made coffee in the same kitchen where he'd once tried to convince me I was losing my mind, and I drank it slowly, leaning against the counter, letting the quiet settle into my bones. The divorce itself was almost anticlimactic. Mark tried to fight at first, hired a new lawyer, threatened to drag it out, claimed half the evidence was fabricated. But Rebecca was relentless. Every motion he filed was met with another stack of documents, another recording, another bank statement that proved his fraud. The judge saw through him in the first hearing. Temporary orders became permanent. Assets were divided, but there wasn't much left on his side to divide. The criminal investigation moved forward quietly but steadily. He took a plea to avoid trial. Felony fraud charges reduced, probation, restitution. He lost his professional licenses. The firm we'd built together was awarded to me outright. I sold it 6 months later for more than we'd ever dreamed to a company that kept all the staff and none of the poison. Claire disappeared from the city. Last I heard, she'd moved back home to her parents. I didn't follow Mark's life after that. I didn't need to. The occasional mutual acquaintance would mention seeing him, living in a small apartment, working some mid-level job that didn't require credentials, looking older than his years. I never asked for details. He'd become irrelevant. Instead, I rebuilt. I took the trip to Italy I'd been saving for all those years, alone, on my terms. I ate pasta in Florence, drank wine in Tuscany, wandered Rome until my feet ached. I sat in cafes and wrote in a journal without looking over my shoulder. I made friends with strangers who never knew the old version of me. When I came home, I redid the house. New paint, new furniture, new art on the walls. Nothing that carried his shadow. I turned the home office he'd used for plotting into a bright studio where I started painting, something I hadn't done since college. Friends came back into my life like they'd been waiting in the wings. The ones he'd called toxic. the ones he'd convinced me were jealous. They showed up with wine and stories and apologies for not seeing sooner. I didn't need the apologies, I just needed them, and they were there. I started volunteering at a local support group for women leaving abusive relationships. Not as a therapist, I'm still too close to it for that, but as someone who could sit across from them and say, I know exactly how that feels, and I know you can get out. Some nights I still jolt awake, heart racing, expecting to hear his key in the door. The body remembers longer than the mind sometimes, but the panic fades faster now. I breathe, I remind myself where I am, and I go back to sleep. Looking back, the agony and suspense of those final months feel like a different lifetime. They were the fire that burned away everything false and left only what was real. I'm not the woman I was when this story began. I'm not even the woman I was pretending to be for him. I'm Sarah, fully, fiercely, finally. The betrayed wife became the unbreakable one. And if there's a moral to my story, it's this. Never underestimate someone you've spent years convincing they're weak, because the moment they stop believing you, they become the most dangerous person in the room. I won. Not just the divorce, not just the money or the house. I won myself back. And that's the victory no one can ever take away.